Hello, I'm Glenn from Group 7 and we're going through vehicular physics, the theory part. So how is vehicular physics important? So firstly, vehicles are a popular form of transportation in the real and virtual world and are used in many games. Like open world games like Cyberpunk 2077 or GTA 5, realistic simulator games such as iRacing and BeamNG, or arcade racer games such as Forza 5, The Crew 2, and Mario Kart. So every game relies on different simulated physics that can vary even from vehicle to vehicle. So what's the problem? The problem is how do we create natural feeling vehicles with many factors like aerodynamic drag, rolling resistance, gravity and more. And we have to calculate these factors every frame while also considering the player's input. So these are the topics I'll be going through. So firstly, how do vehicles work? Firstly, there will be an engine. So in a car, the engine generates torque and rotational speed through combustion of fuel. On a bicycle, obviously the human is the engine. Next, there's the transmission. So the transmission or the gearbox provides multiple gears to vary the torque and rotational speed of the engine output. So this is like the different gear ratios of the bike to keep the RPM comfortable to pedal. Then we have the drive shaft and the differential. So the drive shaft and the differential is responsible for transmitting the torque and rotational speed to the wheels. This is like the bicycle chain to connect the crank and pedals to the cassette or gears on the back of the wheel. Finally, the wheels turn and friction between the tire and ground resists this motion. This results in a force in the opposite direction of the wheel's rotation, pushing the car or the bicycle forward. So, what is torque? Torque is a force that can cause an object to rotate or turn. Torque can be calculated by multiplying the force by the distance from the pivot. This will give us the torque in Newton meters. So torque equals to the force times length of the moment arm. So torque is a vector, and just like how positive net forces can increase an object's velocity, positive net torque can increase an object's angular velocity. So what is traction? When a driver steps on the gas, pedal or accelerator, this increases the RPM of the engine. This in turn generates torque, which is applied to the wheels through the transmission, drive shaft and differential. When the wheels turn, the friction between the tire and the ground resists this motion. And according to Newton's third law of motion, this results in the rope pushing back and moving the vehicle forward. This is traction force and is how we walk, drive and stand. Traction can be calculated using the wheel torque divided by the wheel radius. Next, we got aerodynamic drag. So when you travel through the air, you need to push through it, and in result, the air pushes back. The faster you go, the more air pushes back. That is drag. So aerodynamic drag is the main resistive force at high speeds. So how streamlined an object is called the drag coefficient. And the lower the value, the more streamlined the object is. Typical cars are between 0.25 and 0.3. This is why cyclists try to get into a lower position to reduce their drag coefficient and thus reduce drag. So drag, to calculate drag in the game, we can use the drag equals to the negative drag coefficient times velocity times the magnitude of the velocity. So drag increases exponentially with reference to the velocity and limits the top speed of most vehicles. Next, we have rolling resistance. So when you push a skateboard, it will eventually stop rolling, and this is caused by rolling resistance. It is caused by the frictions between the wheel and the road surface, as well as hysteresis, or the compression and decompression of the rubber tire. Rolling resistance is the main resistive force at low speeds. This is why there's an optimum air pressure to fill your tire to reduce rolling resistance. So to calculate rolling resistance, we can just have a constant and we multiply it by the velocity. So we can increase or decrease the constant depending on how strong you want the rolling resistance to be. And rolling resistance will increase with speed as the rubber gets compressed more frequently at higher speeds, resulting in more energy loss. Next is the braking force. When a driver pushes on the brakes, the brake caliper clamps down onto the brake disc and turns kinetic energy into heat and sound energy by trying to stop the wheels from spinning through friction. This force is known as the brake torque. So the higher the brake torque basically means the vehicle stops faster and requires lesser distance to stop. Next is inertia. When a vehicle lets go of the when the driver lets go of the gas pedal and doesn't push on the brakes, the car will continue rolling until it has run out of kinetic energy from rolling resistance and drag. This is because of inertia. Inertia is the resistance of change of motion. If there was no drag or rolling resistance, the car would keep rolling forever. However, because there is, the car would decelerate and eventually, because of these forces, stop. Next, we have the lateral forces. So basically, how does the car turn? When turning at low speeds, the car normally goes in the direction where the wheels are pointed at. However, at high speeds, the wheel can be pointed one direction, while the car moves in a different direction. This is because there is an additional vector that is perpendicular to the wheels pushing them sideways. Think of a rally car going through a turn or drifting a corner. The angle between the car's orientation and the car's velocity vector is a side slip angle. This is caused by the lateral or cornering forces acting on the wheel when the car is turning. This applies a torque on the car body, which causes the car body to turn. The rear wheels will contribute negative torque and the front wheels will contribute positive torque. Next, we got the vertical forces. So firstly, the suspension system. So the suspension system is a system of springs, shock absorbers and linkages that connects a car bodies to its wheel. Its main purpose is to maintain contact between all four wheels and the ground and to absorb and dampen bumps in the road. So the spring in the suspension applies an equal and opposite force to both the wheel and car body. Since the wheel has lesser mass, when a wheel is airborne, the spring will decompress and push the wheel to the ground instead of pushing the car up. We can calculate the spring force by using Hooke's law. Fs equals to Ks bracket L minus R, where Fs is the spring force, Ks is the spring constant, L is the stretch or compressed length of the string, and R is the rest length of the string. The spring. With this, we can adjust the spring constant to make the suspension stronger or stiffer for track vehicles like track cars, or weaker, softer for off-road vehicles like SUVs. Next, we got weight transfer. So gravity pulls the car towards the earth, and the force vector is drawn from the center of mass downwards. So weight transfer happens because of the vehicle's suspension system and the vehicle's inertia. During a turn to the right, the car will want to keep moving straight. Thus, the center of gravity would be to the left of the center of the car, causing more weight to be shifted to the outside wheels. During acceleration, the car wants to remain at rest. Thus, the center of gravity will be behind the center of the car, causing more weight to be shifted to the back wheels. During deceleration, the car doesn't want to stop moving. Thus, the center of gravity will be in front of the center of the car, causing weight to be shifted to the front wheels. Because of the suspension system, this allows the car to lean and tilt as it's driving around, increasing and decreasing the load of each wheel, as well as maintaining contact with the ground, even when the car body is tilting. So in conclusion, vehicular physics is very complex, and to create natural feeling physics, we have to make vehicles accelerate and decelerate when starting and stopping, allowing the car to roll to a stop instead of stopping immediately when the player lets go of W. And when the car is turning, instead of changing the direction of the car is pointing, change the wheel direction and allow the wheels to apply the torque onto the car body to turn it, as well as accounting for the side slip angle. Lastly, we have to create a suspension system for your car to absorb shocks and bumps, as well as allowing the car to lean and tilt when driving around to increase immersion. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elson, and this is my Unity implementation for vehicles. Okay, first off, rigid body is a built-in Unity component. Rigid body gives mass and physics to your game object. Rigid body includes gravity, which provide gravity that affects the game object. Mass gives mass to the game object, and velocity provides movement to the game object. Okay, why rigid body is important for vehicles? A rigid body may be used by simply attaching it to the vehicle main body and choosing it in the inspection tab. It offers attributes such as force and velocity. Its primary characteristic makes it vital to a car as it gives its mass, and every car has a certain mass and drag, which helps reduce air resistance and cause friction drag that slows down the car. Adding a rigid body to a game object simulates realistic movement based on law of physics as it handles force, velocity, and other physics properties. A rigid body gives a game object its gravitational qualities, ensuring that there is a downward force in giving the object a sensation of weight. Next, a collider. It can be box collider and is a built-in Unity component. Collider is useful for anything, mainly detecting other colliders in the scene. A collider plays a major role when dealing with physics, as it helps simulate real-world physics when it comes to collision and other collision detection. In addition, adding rigid bodies helps simulate physical interactions such as responding to force. Why collider is important for vehicle? The function of a vehicle collider is to detect collision. To create one, just connect it to a body of a vehicle or add an empty game object. Parenting it with the main body of the vehicle and select it from the inspection tab. It is important when it comes to handling physics, as it helps stabilize the physical interaction, reducing glitches. Without a collider, it won't work on a game object. With a rigid body, as it won't have collision detection, since it is needed to define object shapes and boundaries. Problem with ray casting. Without it, the car won't be able to detect the ground or collide with anything, which will have an impact on suspension, tires, and other dynamics components. Next up, wheel colliders. It's a built-in Unity component. A part of the Unity physics engine, the wheel collider is utilized to replicate realistic vehicles' behavior and interaction. Wheel colliders are an amazing built-in component that provides various features such as distance, maximum distance a suspension can extend. Suspension reaches a target position by adding spring force and damping force. Forward and sideways friction adds friction when vehicles moving forwards or sideways. Steering inputs allows the vehicle to turn left or right. Okay, for scripting, to access a rigid body, you need to use dot gap component, which is right here, RB equal transform gap component rigid body. So a rigid body component using gap component rigid body, it assess the rigid body physics such as gravity, mass, velocity, and force. When it comes to dynamic movement, we need to assess the rigid body component as it provides method and properties for applying force and changing velocity. Since force must be used on suspension mechanics, where it deals with compression and extension depending on the terrain and force applied. Rigid bodies also aid with realistic steering, as it requires velocity and refriction to achieve steering mechanics. Next, physics raycast. Because it replicates realistic handling and interaction between the vehicle and the ground, raycast is used to determine the ground distance from the vehicle. So raycast may be used to identify ramps, slope, and uneven terrain, as well as to check for environmental elements and change the force behavior of the vehicle. Raycast allow us to compute wheel rotation, which is crucial for creating steering mechanics in vehicle, as well as the interaction between the ground and the vehicle. So to use use on physics.raycast, which is shown right here, and transform the position, and from there it will shoot the raycast from which position. So minus transform dot up, so you're using minus, it will show upside down and shoot the raycast out. Next, challenge and solution. It presents a challenge to not use the wheel colliders component in Unity for certain mechanics. Example, suspension, as we have to integrate our physics system ourselves to achieve the suspension and steering characteristic that were included in the wheel colliders component. In order to include it, we will need to learn more about creating custom physics scripts and how they work. In particular, I will need to have a basic understanding of Hooke's law, basically for my suspension system, Hooke's law formula for suspension spring, in order to create custom wheels scripts. Combining the two inbuilt physics component, rigid bodies, and collider was one way to solve the problem. However, it is crucial to know their capabilities. Making use of custom scripts, we may accomplish comparable functionalities by making use of the Unity physics. We must precisely calibrate the mass of the vehicle and make required adjustment to the damper and spring stiffness values in order to prevent overbouncing and achieve realistic interaction and movement of the vehicle. In summary, with the correct research, we can create realistic vehicles, but Unity offers a lot of built-in components to help users with vehicles and physics-related implementation. When managing physics in general, it is vital to incorporate rigid bodies, as without a certain built-in components such as rigid bodies and box collider component, which is important for physics, it won't deliver a realistic vehicle. Not using built-in physics like the wheel collider component can help us learn how to make custom scripts and have a better understanding of physics, while combining several Unity built-in components and not always relying on Unity built-in components. However, there are some important components that are needed when it comes to handling physics. Thank you. Here's a reference.
Hello, this is going to be my part. So this is the case study for vehicles. So the three games that I have chosen for the case study is Rocket League, Forza, and F1. So let's take a look in general how the three play out as vehicle implementations. So for Rocket League, the movement is based on fast acceleration and braking. The steering is meant for sharp steering and fast-paced competitive settings. Rocket League also provides very dynamic movement with the implementation of arrows and dodge movement for collision with the ball and other players, as well as a boost mechanic to accelerate to the top speed faster. For Forza, it is based on semi-realistic rally racing simulator. It has a feature of a gear system that is used to enable the player to accelerate. There are upgrades in the game which include engines, transmissions, and tires to increase the car's torque for better acceleration, as well as a physics engine that is used to simulate traversal on different land types. Finally, we have F1 2023, where it is a real-life F1 racing simulator. Its physics engine helps to calculate tire slip and how it interacts with inertia of the vehicle. The acceleration has progressive steps for acceleration in relation to the gear and the throttle, as well as a physics engine that is revised to simulate better aerodynamic behavior. 3, 2, 1. The game that I have chosen is Rocket League, and some of the problems are as stated here. Firstly, balancing acceleration. With multiple affecting forces that all affect how the car drives and feels for the player, whether it feels too slippery or sticky, this means that there are too many variables and forces that all depend on one another and can lead to a harder time implementing a smooth driving experience when a force is not accounted for. Some examples are that the amount of torque needed to move the car would depend on the tire friction. That friction also depends on the spin speed of the wheel, which then depends on the wheel's radius, etc. Another problem that they faced was visuals versus physics. So previously, the art for cars in Rocket League would determine where the physics wheels would be placed. This would, however, affect the overall handling, as it would determine values such as the axle width and separation, which are crucial in providing a suitable driving experience. This would result in long iteration times to get a drivable car, whether it be changing the visual mesh or adding offsets to the wheels until it became suitable for driving. So what are some of the solutions that they created for these problems? So firstly, they decided to let's keep it simple. They used an acceleration curve instead of using transmission to ensure a consistent change in acceleration in various scenarios. So instead of having transmission determine the movement of the vehicle, the transmission will be artificially created through audio instead. So when a player's car is at rest and presses throttle, an X amount of force will be added, but if the player is at top speed, then no force will be added. They will also decide to ignore mass when a force is applied to keep the mass constant when driving, braking, jumping, and in other scenarios. By keeping the mass constant, it will make sure that other three, two, one. By keeping the mass constant, it will ensure that other properties such as the colliders and other values of forces will not need to be tweaked to compensate for the change. They also remove longitudinal friction to reduce the number of forces that affect the vehicle's movement. Secondly, a lateral tire friction. This is to calculate when the car is going perfectly straight to the side or in between to determine the amount of friction needed to keep the car in its trajectory or to put it at a stop. So, simplified by using a ratio to determine how slanted or straight the car is coming in from a landing or from steering. The ratio is then input into a slight friction curve. This gives a more slippery feel when coming in from the side landing than from the front. The friction is then calculated by multiplying the slight friction with the friction of the ground's normal. This helps to simulate similar results of lateral slip angles to give the car a more dynamic feel. Lastly, they also separated visuals and physics setup. The two values of axle width and separation give a ratio that determine the car's ability to steer. So, this will include stability, maneuverability, as well as weight distribution. The wider the width and separation, this increases the stability as they prevent rollovers and are less prone to sudden weight shifts. Narrow width and separation increases maneuverability, which enables the car to take tighter turning circles. Weight distribution can evenly distribute weight to enhance the vehicle's handling. They also switched to vehicle presets to separate the visuals from the physics car setups. This means that they have a set amount of presets for one or more cars. This would include the wheel positions, the radius of the wheels, the colliders, and the translations for the car. One insight that I actually discovered while researching on the games and how it manages to solve its problems is actually using input buffers. So while this is not related to the car's implementation, I thought it was quite interesting. So in the case of Rocket League, having the server wait for the player's input can result in an unreliable experience between the client and the server simulation. So this could mean that the car and the ball would exist in two separate timelines. So instead of processing inputs as they come, they instead put them into a buffer to fill up. When the server runs physics, it takes an item from the buffer, which decreases input delay. It also eliminates cheaters that increase their speed, as their buffer will fill up faster. To avoid empty or full buffers, the client would either use 0, 1, or 2 inputs per frame. So, in conclusion, I think that Rocket League is a great example of handling physics as to not only suit the needs of your game, but can also reliably listen to the community and tweak values when necessary. Psionics also teaches the importance of flexibility when approaching physics-related implementations, to think of simple yet effective strategies, reducing complexity while providing the best results. In summary, keep it simple and effective, and think outside the box, as solutions may not be as complex as you may think. These are my references, and thank you.
Hello, I'm Glenn and this is my implementation. So basically I've implemented the transmission system of a car, so the gear shifting. So what I have here, basically you can see I have just a makeshift drag strip. There's a empty object with a collider at the start and the end of this straight road, and they'll just start and stop the stopwatch down here. In the middle we have the RPM of the wheel, the left we have the speed, and the right is the gears. So you can see I'm pressing left mouse to shift up and right mouse to shift down. So basically what I can do is I'll show you first. So when we go into 5th gear and we accelerate, you can see our acceleration is not the fastest. So basically this mimics the real world transmission system. You can see we got it in 11 seconds. So how it works is that in a real car, the lower the gear, the higher the gear ratio, which will give you a higher torque on the wheels, which will have a higher acceleration but lower top speed. So you can see for gear 1, there is a noticeable stop in acceleration, so like it is still increasing but relatively slowly. And then in gear 2 you can see it's increasing but there's a stop by about here. It's still increasing but slow. And you can see if we shift properly in the gear, remember with gear 5 we hit 11 seconds. If we shift correctly at the correct speeds, we can clear it in 9.2 seconds. So basically, how does this work? I just have wheel colliders on the wheels, and then in my code you can see here I have two arrays, one that contains gear ratios and one that contains the max speed for each gear ratio. So this is so the first gear will be 2.2 with a max speed of 25, etc. So I'll be focusing on just the transmission code. So what I've done here in the get input, right here. So if I click on the left mouse button, we shift up, and if I click on the right mouse button, we shift down. So what happens here is that when I shift up and down, the current max speed changes as well as the gear that changes. So the current max speed will be set as the max speed of the current gear. So like if we are in gear 2, the max speed will be 40. So then how does the speed change? Here in handle motor, you can see if the current max speed is less than the velocity dot magnitude, which is basically the speed of the car, we will set the wheel torque to the engine torque times 0.5. So here in the car, you can see the car controller, there's a variable for engine torque, so you can change that. That's basically how strong you want your engine to be. So engine torque times 0.5. So the car will still accelerate but slower. Then basically if it's not in the max speed, it means it's still accelerating. We want the wheel torque to be the engine torque times the gear ratio of the current gear. So if we're in gear 2, the gear ratio will be 1.8. So then we just take the engine torque times 1.8, and this will give us the wheel torque, and we apply the wheel torque to the front wheels motor torque. So basically what this does is, you can see the gear ratio here. The smaller the gear, the higher the gear ratio. What it does is that it gives us a higher wheel torque but lower max speed, because the max speed for each gear is set here. So the acceleration will be faster, but we'll have a limited max speed. So that is basically how I did the transmission of the car. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nelson, and this is my Part B self-implementation unity for GMAPS, and my topic is vehicles, and my implementation is suspension system. So what is suspension for vehicle? Okay, it basically uh, it's basically a shock absorber, and it helps ensure that you drive safe and smooth by absorbing the energy from various road bumps or humps. And it also helps to move the wheel to move up and down, so it won't be so your wheel won't be damaged easily. And the way I implement it with my vehicle is using rigid body and a box collider. I did not use wheel collider, and I did it with using 4 game objects that represent the suspension, which is front left, right, rear left, and right. So here's my demonstration. With suspension, it helps create a realistic driving uh, for vehicles in Unity. So here's another demonstration with uneven roads. So uneven roads. Okay. And here's my script implementation. So here's my variables, and void start I use transform.root .get object get component rigid body because that my parent has the parent of the car has a rigid body, and I use root to reference it. And the most important one is the max length equal rest plus spring travel. So basically get the spring max length when it's not compressed by anything. With spring travel, we can determine how the spring wheel can extend and compress when it's run over or how. But the spring length is low, the wheel won't have room to extend past spring travel, and it can be with it can be adjusted based how we want the wheel to move up and down. So here's the suspension system script. Okay, I use raycast physics, and taking from the transform of the position, and shoot raycast inverted it upside down, and shoot raycast out, and to get the max length plus the wheel radius. So it's basically getting the raycast length from the origin of the car spring plus the wheel radius. So and next is last length equals spring length. Take the spring length value from the last spring, and next is spring length equal hit dot distance minus wheel radius. Using that to determine the spring length, and using raycast is to hit the distance, so to detect if it hits the ground or not. And with it checks the distance, that is distance between the raycast origin minus the wheel radius as the spring takes the compression, not the wheel. Okay, and the next one is spring velocity equal last length minus spring length divided by time dot fixed time. Using time dot fixed time, it will measure the spring velocity over time by taking current and previous spring length and then divide the time. And the next one is spring force. Basically, making sure that the spring can handle enough force of the rigid body gravitational. To do that, with that, I use spring stiffness, thereby the rest length and the minus length, taking the spring length which is compressed of the wheel, compression of the wheel minus the rest length, and then multiply by the stiffness of the spring, then lift up the car when it's under a hump or uneven ground. And damper equals damper stiffness plus velocity, damping the spring motion based on the spring velocity. So adding a damper stiffness multiplied by spring, it will reduce the bounciness of the spring. And with it, I use spring length equal math dot clamp to clamp down the values. And with suspension force equal spring force plus damper force times transform the arc. Using the foot force formula, applying the force using the spring force. With the spring force, it determine how much force is applied and add damper force. Right, here's another demonstration for the suspension. This will be played on maximum speed, so I can explain some parts. So you see from here the suspension actually works without with my field code, and each suspension works individually. So that's why I mentioned where it can go up uneven terrain. And as you can see from the raycast, there's a spring raycast. Additional with the wheel radius as mentioned here. Next line with the wheel radius from the origin of the car plus the wheel radius. And the spring can be adjusted individually or can be all length. So here's the rest length where I can expand the suspension from here. And I can increase the damper stiffness and the spring stiffness. So and for the spring force, I mentioned that it will lift the car up and fight with the counter the rigid body gravity. So here like it will lift the car up when it run over the hump. So it's like will lift the car up here from spring force. Using the spring force will lift the car up, taking the spring length and the compression minus the compression of the wheel minus the stress length, and then multiply by the stiffness of the spring, then lift it up when it runs over a hump. So not only it works on like ground or hump, it works when an object is pushing down on the suspension. So it will weigh down the one side of the suspension. So if a game object is rigid body, so if I put it down with the left side, so that it will get compressed. So even the left side will get compressed. Okay, so back to this side. works uh, independently. So this is my suspension system physics. Okay.
Okay. Hello, I'm Max, and this is gonna be my Unity implementation for vehicles. So what I did for my implementation was a basic car movement and steering, as well as a nitro boost mechanic. So here I have my car in the scene, and I split up the wheels according to their meshes and colliders. And for the car, I also put in all the wheels as different elements. As you can see, wheel front left, wheel front right, and the two rear end wheels. And this is actually how I'm going to make the car drive, by adding a force to the wheels on the car. So if we go to my code, you'll see that here I made a list of all the wheels. Here I have the max acceleration, the brake acceleration. I also did braking for my car, the turn sensitivity, and also a max steer angle to simulate how a car would actually steer in real life, because you don't see many cars taking really tight turning circles. So I put this steer angle to make sure that a player can't just make a really tight turn all of a sudden. So if we go down here, we can see this is how the nitro boost is going to be applied through a multiplier of 3. It will last for about 2 seconds, and the cooldown will be 5 seconds. So if we go down here, I store the original max acceleration firstly, which will be important later. And in the update method, I get the inputs for my car, which is the player inputs over here. And the player inputs is done through the vertical and horizontal axes. We scroll back up, we can see here, this is how I check if there is a nitro boost, and this helps to update the cooldown for the nitro boost. So if it is in a cooldown, and if the nitro cooldown is less than or equal to 0, that means that there is no nitro cooldown, and the new cooldown should be 5 seconds when there is a nitro boost. If we keep going, we can see that I have the move, steer, and brake functions all in the fixed update. And this right here was meant to make sure that if the car, basically what I wanted to do is, since the car will use the nitro boost and eventually the nitro boost will run out, then if the player were to stop and their acceleration were to go below the original max acceleration, which is the acceleration without the nitro boost, then the max acceleration will be set back to the original max acceleration. This will make sure that the player does not have the increased acceleration speed from the nitro boost after they have gone down the threshold of the original max acceleration. This here is just to ensure that the car is stopped by checking if the velocity of the car is less than 10 f. So in my move function, I have a current acceleration. This basically helps me to see that if the car is using the nitro boost, then the acceleration will be the multiplier times the max acceleration. If not, then the acceleration would just be the original max acceleration. Then here we can see that for each wheel and wheels, I basically apply a force, the acceleration, which is the move input, times 100 times the current acceleration. And this is how uh, I add it through motor torque. If you go down to steer, is around the same thing. So for each wheel, I have a steer angle, which is basically the steer input times the sensitivity and the max steer angle. And then here, this is to look between different steer angles for smoother transitions. And for my brake, if the player presses the spacebar, then the colliders have a force added to them of 150 times the brake acceleration. If not, this else statement means that the car is not braking and the brake torque will equal to 0, meaning that they will not brake at all. For this function, for my activate nitro, this is telling me that if the current nitro duration is more than 0, then I'll only subtract the time when the nitro is active. But if the nitro duration is less than or equal to 0, then it will start the cooldown, meaning the H is nitro on cooldown equals to true, and the current nitro duration equals to the nitro duration. For the animation of wheels, this actually does not work, but what I intended to do was create a rotation and a position, and then get the position and rotation of the wheel colliders. After that, I'll get the rotation angle by multiplying the move input with the turn sensitivity and the max steer angle. After that, I will rotate the wheel model based on the movement, as seen here. Unfortunately, it does not work, but I think it's better to show it instead. So if we go to the Unity game, if I play it, we'll see that the car moves, steering, moving, and then here, let me turn, so you can see that the turn isn't that good. And then if you brake spacebar, it just stops instantaneously. And then now I'll show you my nitro boost. So if we restart the scene, let's count it down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. About 9 seconds to go from one side of the screen to another. But if I use the nitro boost, so if I go here and press B, you see that the nitro is activated in the console and I can go much faster. So that is my implementation for my vehicle. Is basic movement, steering, and as well as a nitro boost mechanic.